Welcome and good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Change of Shift podcast, episode 3. We have a special guest with us tonight. We have a fellow nurse blogger by the name of Beth, who will be joining us shortly. We'll do some introductions here. My wonderful co-host, Emily.
Good
How
evening.
are you this evening?
I am lovely. How are you?
Good. Today's been another busy day on the internets with social media and nursing.
Yeah, and unfortunately, or fortunately, as nurses, we all love that we have jobs, but mine took me away from the social media part for this morning.
Yeah, so it was interesting as usual. The views debacle continues. I think we'll try and get into that maybe a little bit later because I'd actually like to get some thoughts from Beth on that. So.
Oh, absolutely.
Before we introduce our guest this evening, we're going to do a little bit of 5-minute recap on our last episode, which was episode 2, where we actually talked in great detail about the debacle on The View, and we are going to call it the Stethoscope Incident. Hosts of The View decided to maybe accidentally joke about things concerning the nursing profession and made a couple missteps when referring to one of their guests, one of the contestants on the Miss America pageant. So we had a very long and interesting conversation. Care to comment on that one, Em?
Yeah, it's. I'm glad things are dying down a little bit. I hope that we continue to keep that momentum going as far as the Nurses Unite hashtag. But you know, I think everybody's pretty aware of what had happened. If not, we'll pop up the links to our post about it, which has some good links and all of the video links. So now I think we're to the point where we're looking at, you know, their final, what I'm thinking will be their final response to it, and their attempt at an apology, which I was, as you were, very disappointed in. I am still beyond, I don't even know the right word for it.
I like shell shock. I'm going to use shell shock.
It was awful.
Shell shock.
Well,
Mixed.
And the apology just made it worse.
No, you're absolutely correct. So, but we could go on and on and on about that again.
We could.
Emily,
but fortunately, we have Beth here tonight, so
yes.
I don't want to beat the dead horse too much. But I think it definitely, we needed to have some follow up. And interestingly enough, the response to the apology was, I think, collectively was a gut reaction that most of us had, and that was just extreme disappointment. And for those of you who haven't seen it, it was an apology, but not really an apology. We were pretty much told as a profession that, well, you just really weren't listening to us. You didn't really keep it in context. You really didn't hear what we were saying. So, yeah.
It was kind of disheartening.
It was.
So,
it was.
I posted a link on Emily's blog post on the follow-up there, and then I'm about to post a link on my recap of the wonderful apology. We won't go into much more detail than that. I would urge you to take a look at both those blog posts. We go into grave detail. It's very difficult to maintain professionalism when your emotions are running high. So,
well, and I think for me, Sean, the most important part of that was seeing all of the nurses and seeing the photos of all the nurses in their, I'll use the Views phrase, their costumes.
Mm-hmm.
You know, looking very professional, looking very proud, and the then responses to those photos from individuals. I had family members and friends posting their support on both my personal and the professional blogging Facebook page of mine.
Yeah.
That was awesome. That was absolutely awesome.
So for those who have joined us, we're just kind of recapping on our last episode, which talked about The View. But without further ado, we're going to get down to business here. Episode 3, interview with Nurse Beth. Our guest, Beth Hawkes. Did I pronounce that right, Beth?
You did.
Okay, Beth Hawkes. I'm going to read a little bit about her here before she takes the show away here. She has her credentials MSN, RN, HACP. She is on Twitter. She is on a personal blog called nursecode.com, and she also runs a advice column over on allnurses.com. On her personal blog, nursecode.com, she has well over 500 subscribers, and I don't think I need to tell anyone about how popular allnurses.com is. A little bit about her from one of her bios on the All Nurses site says that Nurse Beth has had more than 25 years of experience in clinical and leadership positions. She has a passion for helping nurses, and as a professional writer has written several articles about interviewing, resumes, navigating the job search network, and much more. Nurses often gravitate to Beth to ask for advice and insight. And without further ado, Beth, welcome to the show.
Thank you. I'm so glad to be here.
We're very happy that you accepted our invitation.
As our first official guest.
Yeah, you are our first official interviewed guest.
I am so honored. Thank you.
So, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Well, let's see. I've been a nurse for a long time, as you mentioned, over about 25 years now. And I've worked always in the hospital setting and acute care. It's kind of in my blood. I have worked orthopedics, med-surg, ICU. I identify most with telemetry because that's where I spent, I'd say the most years in a row, the most consecutive years. After I'd been in bedside nursing for a while, I went into management, and I was manager of a tele unit, and then another tele unit, and then for some reason a GI lab, which that's just how they do things, you know.
Quite the change.
So that was interesting. And I was in management for many years, and then I wanted to go back to the bedside because I never wanted to become detached from the bedside or from bedside nurses. I kind of made that vow when I first started nursing. I said, I'm never going to become, what I saw some older nurses become, which was just out of touch, I think. Mm-hmm. And so that was really important to me to stay close to patients and nursing. So I actually went back to the bedside. But then after a short time, I went into, at our hospital, we call it IntelliCare. It's informatics. That At that time, we were rolling out CPOE. So I had an opportunity to teach that and be involved in some of the build and so on and the order sets, and that was great.
For those listening or watching, CPOE is computerized physician order entry.
Ooh, bite your tongue. Computerized provider order entry.
Provider. Look it up on any e-record. It says physician.
Yes. So, but currently now I'm working as a nursing professional development specialist, which is a fancy word for med-surg educator in our hospital. And I absolutely love it. I'm still in acute care. I get to support nurses all the time, every day. I get to teach, I get to create. Just kind of love it. So that's where I'm at up till today.
Up till today.
I mean, that's the thing about nursing. It's an adventure.
It is.
Yes, it is.
And there are so many options in nursing. I think the general public has absolutely no idea. All the different things that you can do.
So 20 plus years of experience, all in acute care. And you shared with us in the pre-show that you're about to celebrate your 1-year blog anniversary. So tell us how blogging showed up in your nursing world a year ago.
Well, I was off work last summer, July-ish, August, with a back injury. And I was on Twitter quite a bit at that time. And, Twitter's kind of like mini blogging, you might say, right?
Mm-hmm. I would agree.
And meeting all kinds of people and really enjoying it, especially nurses. And Joan Spritzy, I may be mispronouncing that. She's known as the nurse teacher on Twitter. You've probably seen some of her, and she's also a good writer. And she said to me one day, I was on Twitter, and she said, home recovering, and she said, when are you going to start blogging? Now, sometimes you just hear kind of a serendipitous message, and it resonated. And my husband came home for lunch that day and said, how are you doing? Do you need anything? Because I was, after all, recovering. And I said, yes, honey, I need a MacBook Air. They have
Awesome. You just made a bunch of Mac fanboys and girls very, very happy.
I'm pretty happy with it. So by that night, I had my laptop, and then I had to teach myself how to set up a blog. And then I had to, get a name and all those little details. And it really wasn't that hard. And then I started writing some articles, and I thought, you know what? I should probably have 4 or 5 ready to go. When I published my first one, I had a strategy, right? And That's what I did. And last September 19th, I published my first blog post, and it's kind of been a wild ride since then. It really has. Fun.
What has surprised you the most about diving in headfirst to both microblogging and long-form blogging?
Well, I'll tell you what surprised me the most. Well, first, let me back up on something you just said on diving in. It's kind of my style when I do things. I rather do tend to dive in headfirst. Oh, and I was watching your podcast from 2 nights ago, I think, you guys. You were talking about work-life balance. I'm so guilty of having absolutely none of that. I just really get obsessed is the word that comes to mind. But
my co-host over here.
Yeah, I mean, and I find a lot of nurses are not unlike that. So
no, it's very common, which is why I'm a big proponent, believer in trying to get people to do some sort of balance, because it leads to burnout so quickly.
I think that is such a good idea, Sean, and I fully intend to try that someday.
Well, you must have a secret, because after 20 plus years of experience, you haven't burned out and you plow forward. So you at least know how to maintain the sanity while doing that.
Well, you can rejuvenate yourself.
Yes, you can. You take a lot of mini vacations.
Reinvent yourself too. But Emily, your question, what surprised me? This is what really surprised me. I thought that if you wanted to write, articles in a blog post and have people read them, you just had to write good content. And I was totally surprised. You're smiling. I learned that's not the case at all. I read somewhere, somebody said, you can paint the most beautiful painting in the world to rival a Picasso. And if it sits in your garage, nobody will see it.
Yeah. That is.
Oh, we could
profound.
so go farther with that. So,
that is absolutely profound.
So
that's what I learned.
So a year ago it was nursecode.com, and then you now have a advice column on allnurses.com. Tell us how that happened.
I'm actually Dear Nurse Beth. Let's ask Nurse Beth is the name of my column. So this is really kind of interesting, because I always, so I grew up with Dear Abby, and there's another one. I mean, I loved it. I'd read it every day. And Irma Bombeck.
Yep.
And I said, I want to do that. So one day I was on allnurses.com, and they were looking for writers, and I contacted them to say I would write an article for them. And that was the first connection I had with them. And then I had this idea. I thought, I would ask them or suggest that they needed an advice columnist and that it should be me. And they were like, we talked for a while back and forth about what it would look like. And that's it. That's the story. So you could say I pitched it to them, and
worked out pretty darn well.
I do really enjoy doing it. That's great.
So I'm gonna.
Well, and I think that that leads to a really good piece of advice for anyone who's getting into writing. And, I think the biggest step is the first one. It's really putting yourself out there. And like Sean and I have found doing this stuff that with our, the New Change of Shift podcast. I mean, this didn't exist a week and a half ago, but we've got just amazing nurses and amazing healthcare providers that are already stepping up. And I think a couple of them have been very surprised when we've approached them to ask them to be part of this. And I don't think it's as difficult to get into it as people assume it is. It's just taking that stuff out.
I think what's so wonderful is that Beth kind of coined the idea that I always tell other nurses when they ask about blogging. What do you do to start blogging? Just write. Doesn't matter where you write it, how you write it, just get your words out there. Don't worry so much about the name or the way it looks and the WordPress or Blogspot or Square. Just pick something free, start something, and go. And what I love the most about, you can go look at nursecode.com on Beth's blog. It is as simple as it gets. It is straightforward, black and white, and it is just all about her content. So it doesn't matter what it looks like. It's just getting your words out there. Now, it sure does help that Beth has all these experiences that she gets to write about, but that doesn't mean that there aren't nurses who are in nursing school that can't do the very same thing. And I love the fact that she pitched her own idea to the juggernaut of allnurses.com. And here she is a year later with blogging for them, her personal site, and I believe you actually blog for at least one or two more sites, don't you?
I blog for two other sites. I blog for BSN to MSN.org, and I blog for Staff Garden. It's a startup company, and I, along with several other bloggers, are contributing to their site as well. And then I also write for Competencies for HealthStream. It's a learning management system.
Wow.
And
okay, so how do you do your jobby job? I mean, seriously, that's you must, I would love to pick your brain on the post show on how you schedule all that, because I have all these ideas up in my head, but I just don't seem to have the time to sit in front of the computer screen and type. And that's a really bad excuse for someone who's been doing this for as long as I have.
For someone who's been pestering me about being even worse than you.
That's why I was up until all hours last night posting onto our site last night about the stethoscope incident, but we'll digress again. So I want to read something from All Nurses over on Beth's bio that really kind of just drew me in. Is the fact that she likes to call herself the nurse's nurse. And that just spoke to me. She says, and quote unquote from her bio on allnurses.com, I'm a nurse's nurse because my heart and my point of view has always been that of a bedside nurse. It's important to me that processes make sense for the bedside nurse and practice is evidence-based. I'm known as our hospital's researcher, policy person, and fact checker. And that is the bomb.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Because every nurse should strive to do that. Because that's not and I hate to say this, it's not a superhero quality. It's just doing your job, doing it correctly, not doing something because someone said that's the way we always do it. And the fact that I think every nurse needs to have their foot somewhere at the bedside. I think that's where you at least can relate with the remainder of the profession. And that doesn't mean you have to be in the hospital at the bedside. You should be practicing somewhere clinically in some way. And I will always take that to my nursing grave, is that I think that's where the action is. I think that's where boots on the ground is where we make the most impact.
Well, and
what do you think about that?
Yeah.
No, I agree with everything that you said, and I can speak for myself that my heart is in the hospital. It just is. It's in my blood. I also And I think that's the heart of it for me. I see that nursing is changing, healthcare is changing, and there's more opportunity happening outside of the hospital. It's going to be different for the new generations of nurses. There's going to be a lot more nursing done outside of acute care setting, in prevention and so on. But like I said, for me, the heart of nursing is being right by a patient's bed, pushing a bed in the elevator, making somebody comfortable, pushing a little pillow behind their back, and, touching a patient. Mm-hmm. Touching a patient is very important. And I am a bedside nurse. To a fault, and probably, I think it drives the administration at my hospital crazy at times, but I cannot not speak up when things either don't make sense or it's because we've always done it that way. Mm-hmm. And when they fail to see how a new process is going to affect nurses, nurses have to be included. And unfortunately, they're not all the time. Nurses have to have a voice in the processes that happen. They have to have the tools they need to practice, evidence-based practice. They need all the resources. And I just think that's also important.
My co-host and I are biting our tongues because you are cut from the same cloth as us. So I was reading my co-host's mind when you were saying right that. There. So yes, absolutely. So and I think and Emily and I have military background, so sometimes it doesn't make the greatest leaders because leaders have to have the ability to bite their tongue. And that's why it probably took me as long as it took me to become a nurse practitioner, is because I didn't know how to do that. I was not good at that.
That ability, I think completely, pretty much. And but you know what? I make things happen, and I bring about change. And I really have left. I mean, I am really, really proud of that. And the nurses at my hospital know that. And I will do anything. I will change policy. I will appeal. I will research. I will teach. I will create to make things better for nurses, because that makes things better for patients. And
all right, so I want to keep moving forward here. So we were talking about allnurses.com. I just posted a link down at the bottom there. You actually met Brian.
Yes,
is that correct? Yeah, so you met him. I think I remember reading it somewhere that you met him at NTI.
Yes, I did.
Yeah, so we did share that story, I think, in our first episode, Emily.
I believe so.
That unfortunately, Brian Short, who was one of the founders of allnurses.com, had taken his own life, and unfortunately murdered his family on top of that, or at least that's what the evidence is suggesting. I'm not going to assume anything. I just want you to give 5 minutes on what you thought of him personally, because I obviously never met him, and I only communicated him maybe a couple handful times when I was active on allnurses.com.
I'm really glad. I met him only once. It was last spring at NTI in San Diego, and I live in California, so that worked out well. And I'm really, in hindsight, I'm really glad, because I tend to trust my own impressions of people, and I'm glad I had that. I don't have to have a second, rely on what somebody else thinks, because a lack of it. So I did get to meet him, and I'm the kind of person that watches people. I talk a lot, but I watch as well. And my first impression of him was, my immediate first impression, he had a quiet aura about him. He was setting up the allnurses.com booth and, working behind the scenes to do it, and working right along with, his team. And I noticed that anytime there was an opportunity to grab the microphone or say something to the crowds, and there were many opportunities over, the convention, he shied away from that. So I read him as not the upfront person. He was very happy to be behind the scenes. We went out to dinner, and with the whole team, with quite a few people. And what I watched at dinner was how did he interact with the staff? Because that tells me a lot about somebody. Mm-hmm. Meaning, were they inhibited? Were they free to express their ideas? How did he react? Did they look to him for all that kind of thing? I just pick up on things like that. Did they look to him for approval? I wanted to kind of get a read on that. And I did. And he was, they were very free and sharing their own ideas. Ideas were kind of popping around the table. It seemed very creative. And he listened to them because I watched his eyes. Was he really listening to what they were saying? And he was. And he wasn't dominating by any means the conversation. So that's pretty much my impression. Also, a sense of generosity because, well, I've heard this from other people as it came out, friends and neighbors, just generous about footing the bill, you know, things like that.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
So it sounds like he was a very good leader.
I think so. I came home and told my husband he's just a down home Minnesota guy. That was my impression. He's just like the guy next door, you know, with a picture of a fish that he caught riding a snowmobile, and that was my impression.
All right. Well, thank you for sharing your thoughts on that. So it's still a very somber topic, but I felt it was important to at least mention it. All right, so we already, as always, have veered off of our wonderful script. Already asked a couple questions from the interview, slot. So we're going to move on to the actual interviewing questions. And I'm going to let Emily pick the first one.
Oh, so Sean did all of our prep for tonight. So, actually, I have a question for you that's not on the list. So, Sean, here we go.
See?
So in your professional capacity, one of the things that we've talked about is the challenges of being very public with your writing and being part of a professional organization, whether it be a hospital or, you have a career in a different field. How does your employer handle or support or address this part of your hobby set with you? And do other staff members where you work know that you are a blogger?
Hi, Emily, I'm sorry you were cutting out on my end.
No, it's okay. We're back to audio now. You still with us?
I am, but Amy was cutting out. I didn't get the whole question.
With you being a blogger and being very public in the internet's a very public forum, how does your employer either address it? Do they support you? Has it been a challenge to balance the professional bedside at the hospital position you're in with and this is a hobby. It's a very strong, you have to have very strong dedication to do this. But it overlaps. How have they responded to this part of who you are and what you do?
Positively, I keep the two very separate, very careful about that. I do absolutely, I talk very little about it at work. I do zero self-promotion at work. I am very careful on social media to be professional and be mindful of HIPAA, of course. And because I know that a lot of nurses are anonymous because it's a fine line to walk. If you take a different position than your employer, for example, and then you want to express that, you may be off duty, but you're still an employee. So you have to be mindful of that. I think respectful. And I think there's a way to articulate how you feel respectfully of all parties that may be affected. I mean, I represent my hospital. I'm aware of that. So I feel like I never write anything that I couldn't come back and explain, defend. I try never to cast blame, that kind of thing. But I still want to bring about change. Does that make sense?
It makes absolute sense. It makes absolute sense. And the reason why I ask is it's something I've struggled with.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Well, just finding that balance and, coming out from being anonymous and under that, some semi-anonymous shell was a very big deal in my world. So I've been interested to hear, especially people who are nurses specifically and live in different parts of the country, how they've had people respond to them. I know, Sean, you've told me a story about nurses that you work with finding stuff that you've read and didn't realize it was from you. So I was, very, very curious because I think, Beth, just the little bit of time we've spoken on the show tonight, in the military, there's this whole old adage of you lead from the front and you lead by example. And, it sounds like you are very much that way. And I see other nurses, especially new bloggers in the social media world, looking to you for that path and that appropriate professional path. And I think that's awesome.
Well, Emily, I felt uncomfortable. Maybe it was last winter, and I just had to write about nurses calling in sick and being penalized extra if they called in sick before, on, or after a holiday or some such variation thereof, which I think is absolutely ridiculous. I mean, and punitive, and that's how I feel. And so I wrote an article about that. And I think it was, when you compare it to other industries, it's just, it doesn't hold water. At any rate, and I was uncomfortable because our hospital does that. Like a lot of hospitals, I think it's an old policy that exists. It's just always been there. And by holiday penalizing, what I mean is if you call in on a regular day, let's say that's 1 point on a point system. If you call in on Thanksgiving, it's 2 points. And maybe even the day after, if it's the Friday when everybody goes, something like that is what I'm talking about. So my position was against that it wasn't really respectful to professional people. So at any rate, I was uncomfortable because it's against my hospital's policy, but I chose to write it anyway. Well, then nobody's
rebel.
I'm sorry, what?
Rebel.
I am. I am a rebel. I warn people. You've been warned. So anyway, I was at a meet and greet for some residents we were hiring a couple months after that in the springtime. And our CNO, our nursing CNO, I was in the buffet line with her. She said, Beth, I want to talk to you. I go, great. She said, she goes, that we need to work on the absenteeism policy. I just haven't had time, but it's really been something burning. And I would just be so glad if somebody would volunteer to do that. That wasn't great. I was so glad that I didn't get in trouble, and furthermore, that it made her think.
Yeah, that
was the best.
Wow. Yeah, because it's scary.
So far, I haven't gotten too much trouble.
Good.
Only at year 1, dear.
No, I'm still gainfully employed. I need.
So, I mean, I hate to say it, but as a blogger, if you do this long enough, you're going to tread that. You're going to walk on that line, and you're probably going to step over it. But it's, when you step over it, are you stepping over it and cutting your leg off, or are you just stepping in on a banana peel kind of thing? It's everybody wants and should continue to try and be HIPAA compliant. It's the individuals that are carefree and care less about their words. And that's really what matters.
Well, and I think a lot of it too is how professional you've been. It's one thing to toss something on Facebook when you're not paying attention and, open up a whole can of badness that gets a lot of other people sucked into that as well. But if it's, if it's very well articulated, it's, evidence-based. essentially is what it boils down to.
Yeah.
It's still a risk, but I think that says a lot also for your CNO and the support structure you have at your institution. That's awesome.
I'm very fortunate where I work. And also, Emily, I like what you said. I am all about having a discussion. It doesn't matter so much what side you're on. It's just that it's not negative, that we're discussing something.
Right.
Like things need to be discussed, like the image of nursing, which has been talked about quite a bit the past couple of days.
Yeah.
Like discrimination. Like there's so many things. Patient ratios, age discrimination, things I've written about recently. There needs to be a discussion, but without name calling.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
It just belittles nursing to the public if we do that.
Yeah. So you said it perfectly. Is you can talk about every topic out there that concerns us, and you can do it in a way that's not finger pointing or breaking any laws. So
well, and to me, complaining is like eating chocolate cake. You can complain a little, have a piece of chocolate cake. It's when you continue to complain and or eat the entire cake and just continue to wallow in it that it becomes unhealthy.
Well, I mean, to close up this topic is that if you blog long enough and you become, let's use the term popular, you become popular enough, you're going to have to pay the fiddler one way or another, because your hospital or your coworkers or your manager, they're going to see it eventually. It's going to happen whether you like it or not. If you do this long enough, you will get noticed, because nurses are notorious for sharing things that they think is important or good information, and that's how Emily was discovered. That's how I've been discovered. And I have no doubt that if you haven't been discovered yet in your work environment, Beth, you will be. So, and you have nothing to fear, because everything that you've done up to this point is genuine and worthwhile. So you haven't pointed it, like, I wouldn't know where to even begin looking if I wanted to go find your employer, because you've never actually mentioned your employer. So I think we have a question here. Dr. Mike Sevilla wants to know if you have an actual social media policy in your hospital, Beth. Do you know of one?
I think we do, or was it just talked about? I'm not sure. I would have to check. We have a practice, and sorry. I'm sorry. My hospital actually is active on Facebook and on Twitter. So there's we are kind of encouraged to participate in social media.
Yeah, I think I'm pretty sure that if they're practicing or at least sharing, then I'm betting you that there's some sort of policy already in place, because that's sort of what happened with my area of where I work. And I know that it sort of happened with my co-host in a roundabout way, is that most systems don't really think about it until something bad or something bad could have happened sort of ordeal. So then they have to at least list some standards or certain things they can or cannot do. So, because I know my hospital system has one. Well, and it's not like you can't do things. It's you can't share patient information. You can't take a picture and have the patient information or anything revealing out on the internet while you're at work, those kind of things, because it kind of rolls over into what patients are allowed to do when their actual family members there taking pictures and things like that. So there's a very in-depth policy where I work.
It's been fascinating for me to watch it, because we are actually directed to put disclaimers up and say that, I work for my hospital, and this is not their opinion. This is my opinion. And it's been very exciting for me to watch that policy change, because it used to be very shut down. and thou more of a thou shalt not. And now it is very much a, yes, we want you to have this conversation and be part of this conversation. So,
Wow.
my healthcare institution, I believe, is following me on Twitter right now. So, and we have a whole social media department, which I'm very fascinated with. So, it's cool to see how different places in hospitals and organizations deal with it. So,
all right. So let's talk about, you mentioned, Beth, that you started the blog, got the computer, got the website up, and you garnered a couple blog posts before you actually revealed it. What was your very first blog post?
It was, I don't even know which one my first one was. There was a group of them. I'll tell you the first one. I consider my first one is called I Was Suspended.
I remember that one.
For a medication error. And
I remember that.
I told the story of when I was made a medication error as a new nurse, and I was suspended for 3 days. And I tell the story and what I learned from it and how it affected my practice.
Yeah, I liked that one because you not only admitted what you had done and what happened about it, but you also explained that this is more common than you're actually wanting to admit, and that making a mistake is one thing, but not owning up to it is another thing. So it was a very enlightening post.
I have on my website the saying, whatever you think or feel, trust me, you are not alone. And I think things like medication errors can be close to traumatic for nurses. And sometimes it's not talked about, but the only way to manage those kind of experiences is to share and talk about them. So I wanted to help other new nurses who were going to go through the same thing.
And I am absolutely sure that somebody benefited from it.
Well, and what a gutsy post to put up there. And like you said, it's something that we don't talk about, and we probably should. And I think when you get into the whole the Swiss cheese concept, which I really, really like, it helps people to understand by experience, but also when you look at it from a bigger picture, that there was probably a reason. I too have had, and Sean, I'm sure you have too, have either had.
Yep. I'm literally telling Nurse Pammy that it's survivable because I did it too.
Oh, I think we all have.
Mine was pretty scary. So, but it was, mine happened in a very, a very good environment. I just say to use the word good, like best case scenario for something to go wrong kind of thing. So, but everybody makes it, no matter how small or large. Once again, kind of the parallel to blogging is that the longer you're a nurse, you are eventually going to make a medication
Absolutely. Error. And yes, and I hate to see, usually a lot of times nurses, because they're at the point of administration, sometimes take the full brunt of the blame. And like Emily said, that's rarely the case. It's, if you do a root cause analysis and really dig deep on any medication error, you can often find, I see how that could happen.
Oh, yeah.
What's really interesting is that I'm part of the committee that talks about medication errors and the throughput system from start to finish when something goes wrong. So the throughput system has changed so much that we actually over-check things. And then we have what everybody, the three of us, have heard more than enough times, is alarm fatigue. Is that you get this alarm that do you really want to do that? And you just click it to get it off your screen. Wait, do you really want to do that? Just click it to get it off your screen. And you get alarm fatigue, and it actually causes a medication error instead of preventing one. So it's a very interesting world we live in now.
Yes, and one thing I want to see happen that I'm working on at my facility is double checks of medications need to be meaningful and according to process and not a shortcut. And specifically on sub-Q insulin, I'm going to work towards eliminating the double checks on those, because the reason is we do not have any adverse events around sub-Q insulin. So we need to focus our safety procedures and energy on things where we do have problems.
Absolutely.
And stop the white noise just because we've always done it that way, and insulin's a sacred cow. IV insulin, yes, absolutely, but sub-Q, no. And it diminishes the meaningfulness of a double check on other medications, I think. So that's an example of sometimes doing things the way we've always done them can actually lead to error.
No, I could tell you some stories.
Well, and you talked about helping in being one of the driving forces behind implementation of CPOE. Yes. And I think when we initially started going to that, they found that here we thought it was going to be this silver bullet to fixing all of these medication errors. And we realized, I think it was Dr. David Bates who did a lot of the publishing on it, and all of the errors that resulted from process that no one anticipated. Mm-hmm. So
and then we thought, well, barcode scanning. Okay, that's
oh yeah.
You can't make an error with barcode scanning, but I guess we can still.
Yeah. All right. So we've talked about your first blog post. Let's talk about your favorite blog post. And this can be anywhere that you've published anything anywhere. What's your favorite blog post?
I'm kind of. Can I say two? Two?
Sure.
Okay. I'm pretty happy with the one I just did. It's kind of a clever little satire. It's called Nurses as Waitresses with Stethoscopes. So
I
kind of like that one. But actually, I'd have to say that my favorite one was, it's called Nursing's Dirty Little Secret.
Yes. That one I think has garnered the most attention, hasn't it?
You know, that's a good question, because I don't know, you guys are more experienced bloggers than I am, but I am surprised it doesn't always correlate, which I'll write something and say, okay, this is it. This is it, Beth. It's going to go viral. And it's a dud. And then I'll write something else and it's popular. Here's an example. It's called, Are You Cut Out to Be an ED Nurse?
Yeah, that one blew up.
That's like by far the most viewed thing I've ever written. And I wouldn't have guessed that, you know, so, and it's not my favorite, but it resonated. Yeah. But anyway, back to my favorite is Nursing's Dirty Little Secret, because it talks about something I feel passionate about. The day that I saw, you know, this really happened, and I asked this nurse's permission to tell the story. You know, I walked into the supply room, and a new resident nurse, not very long ago, was in tears on a med-surg floor, absolutely brought to tears at 3 o'clock in the afternoon because of the workload, because pressure from the ED to admit patients, and the pressure starts from the top and filters on down through the house supervisor to the charge nurse to the resident, and how a 6-month-old nurse is treated the same work-wise as a 6-year-old nurse or a 16-year-old nurse. How can that possibly make sense? Anyway, so I've been feeling strongly about that for a while anyway, so I wrote about the workload and the complexity of the job, and that we need to extend orientation more like a medical model, I think, a residency. I think at least a year. I think new nurses need a year before they're totally independent.
Well, and you look at,
that could be a whole other topic.
And you look at the novice to expert you know, theory that Patricia Brenner put out, and the older I get and the longer I've been in the field, the more I truly believe in it. I'm to the point where I was talking to my upline today, and we were discussing that. You know, some of the best advice I think I ever got was that one of my preceptors looked at me and said, "You're not going to feel confident until you've been in the ICU for 2 years."
I was just going to say, you know, I wrote a blog post on my personal site about 3 weeks ago, and it's called The 2-Year Itch.
Oh.
For that very reason, is that it's the 2-year mark when everybody goes from feeling like I'm going to go home and cry because I'm glad I didn't kill anybody to actually feeling somewhat in control of your practice. Right. You're not an expert, but you at least have the confidence to show up and know what you're doing. You stop asking questions and you start answering questions. Though I don't know why it's 2 years. It
is though, right?
It's 2 years because you need to have that much time on the floor. It has nothing to do with your intelligence or your skills. Right. It has to do with just experiencing the experience, nothing more.
Right.
So,
well,
I shared on my post that it was 2 years as an RN, and it's been 2 years as an NP.
Oh, really?
That finally at the 2-year mark as being an NP, I can feel like instead of being scatterbrained and having to look up every single thing that I'm supposed to know, I can actually I can sound it off without having to go, let me go look that up. I'll be back. So, and it really is. And it happened at the 2-year mark and I didn't even know it.
Wow.
So, yeah. So that's a wonderful, and I just, this is why we're doing the show, Beth, because 3 individuals, 3 different times in the world of the career of nursing, 3 different areas of nursing can all agree that the 2-year mark is right when you can say, wow, I think I know what I'm doing. So
I think I'm going to have to stay up late and read an article tonight.
Okay. All right. So we're cutting on time again. So as usual, we love to talk too much. So let's ask one final question here. And this is the one that I want to know because I had them when I started, and I believe Emily had them when she started. But who are your blogging heroes? When you started blogging, who did you look up to? Who did you keep going back and looking at when you were blogging, when you first started?
Oh my goodness.
Because everybody does it. Everybody writes a post and then you go and back and you look at someone who's been doing it for a while. And that while could be 6 months. It doesn't matter. But somebody has been blogging before you. You go back and look at their stuff.
There are so many good bloggers and out there. And I like, let's see, I'll tell you the ones that come to mind. Lori, and I don't know how to pronounce it because I've just seen it, not heard it. Lori Shunley, the correct nurse.
Yeah. She's a correctional nurse.
I love her writing style. It's informative. I feel like I got something after I read it. It's easy to read. To me, it's logical. I like things that seem to flow in a sensible fashion. Joan Sprightly, the nurse teacher.
You're gonna have to try and post that because I don't know.
Okay,
that.
I will. I'm gonna put out on my blog a list of bloggers I read.
Okay.
Joan I wish that she would write more because again, I just enjoy. She'll write something informative. For example, she's a clinical educator and she takes students to the hospital. And she'll write tips for them. One time last year, she wrote about, I think, everything you need to know about chickenpox. Wasn't there kind of a chickenpox thing going? Anyway, it's just very informative, very timely. And her style, again, is what I enjoy. Katie Cleaver is just heartwarming, genuine.
Yeah. She still has my respect, even though she's working where I used to work. I still love her work.
Yeah, so. I'm not always that astute about following what's going on, but I did garner that you're no longer with Scrubs.
No longer with Scrubs. We'll talk about that another time. Trust me. Everything happens for a reason, and it's a blessing in disguise. So this would not exist had that not happened, and that's enough for me because it's created so much for me and others.
Yeah.
So.
Yes. Katie.
Yes. So.
Okay. Then there's one of the bloggers, Megan Duffy. I don't think she writes very much. Not Nurse Ratchet.
Not anymore, but we all know Megan. Not Nurse Ratchet.
Yeah. And since I've become a blogger, I've kind of, like I said, I'm always not that astute. Well, I've become aware of. I don't know. before I came on the scene, maybe past likes and dislikes or political discussions that I never took part of or were. Anyway, and some people, maybe even some camps within nursing writers I've kind of observed kind of quickly. Yep. But at any rate, but when I first started writing, Megan is very clever. I love reading everything she writes because she just cracks me up.
Yeah, she has a very, the sarcasm that she has is hilarious.
I'm kind of a kindred spirit with that. She just cracks. I think she's just very clever. And Megan, after I'd only been writing about a month, she got me a gig. She referred me to somebody who needed a writer, and I'm still writing for them.
So I'm going to interrupt you quickly. You were talking about listing all the blogs that you read or visit. You know, there's a thing called the Blogroll. I don't know if you've heard of that.
Oh.
Blogs have what are called a Blogroll, and I don't even know if they call them a Blogroll anymore. They call them reading lists or take your pick. But to us old-time bloggers, they were called a Blogroll. And back in the day, and this is back 04, 05, pre-Twitter days, you had made it big when you made it onto another blog's Blogroll.
Really? Okay.
Yeah, so I remember the day when my blog made it onto my then co-host's Crazy Girl blog, because Emily and one of our guests from Twitter, Dr. Mike Sevilla, you don't know this, but we won't talk about it again and again and again, but they were my blog heroes, and getting on her Blogroll was like, I had made it, I'm going to retire now kind of thing. So yes, the Blogroll still exists. I know they're out there, but they're not as useful as they used to be. But they still have a purpose. And so
I've always enjoyed your writing very much. You know, you were the first person I ever reached out to, obviously. So you made a big impression on me. And when you answered my DM, I was pretty blown away.
Oh, well, thank you. So yeah, Beth reached out to me to ask some questions about writing for other people and how do you garner payment and how do you properly cite it and properly own it, those kind of things. And being in the game long enough, I had the answers for her. So, and I learned those the hard way. So I was glad to pass on that knowledge so that people can learn from my mistakes when it comes to that. So, all right, we're coming up on the hour here. So we're gonna finish with one more thought because it's still a hot topic in the media right now. We're going to talk briefly about the stethoscope incident. And the only reason why I'm bringing up the stethoscope incident is that our guest actually made a comment on her Twitter, and I just threw you the link. And on her Twitter, she actually stated with an arrow that says, "Member of Association of Nurses with Stethoscopes." And I thought that was beautiful because it spoke volumes, and you didn't say anything derogatory, negative. You were professional, and thank you, Mike. And you got your point across. So I would like you to spend the last couple minutes of this show telling me why. What prompted you to say that?
I was astounded, I think like everybody, when I saw the clip of the view. But I like to reflect on things sometimes before I come to a final conclusion. And my conclusion today, after a couple of days, is I think it was ignorant but not intentional. And I'm kind of like over it. I mean, I don't want nurses to show a lot of negativity in response. That's going to hurt us, not anybody else. And then I think they were further ignorant in their apology because they clearly did not prepare for either statement. And so you have unprepared women on TV talking about things just off the top of their head, it's just, I don't know what to say. It was totally ignorant. I think maybe some good can come out of it because it raises a discussion. And I think the question that it raises is, what is our image, and why is that our image, and what's our responsibility for our image in nursing? I think that's a big question there.
I'm going to let Em talk on this one.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. And I think that's probably the most important point that we can take away from it. You know, I agree that it was just ignorance and it was lack of preparation on their part. And I think we have realized that people just don't understand what we do.
Right.
They don't understand the enormous scope that is nursing. And I think a lot of times as nurses, we don't even understand everything about nursing. I mean, how many people do you know that are in the nursing field who don't really understand what a nurse practitioner is, or, you know, that it's becoming more important to get your doctorate as a nurse as you progress in your education and in your licensure. So I think we need to embrace it. I think we need to do something good with it. And I think continuing to find people like you, Beth, who are willing to put yourself out there, and be such a strong leader and be such an articulate leader, that's what it's going to take. And it's going to take breeding the next couple of generations in having them understand how important that piece is. It's not just putting your shoes on, grabbing your stethoscope and going to work. There is so much more to it than that.
I think we, you know, and I'm going to include you in this, Beth, is that we as the leaders need to utilize this publicity, and I think we should funnel it into whatever way we can. I mean, that's why I'm still talking about it, because it's at least bringing awareness. And, you know, today on Facebook, and mostly Facebook, there was a lot of negativity out there. People were basically saying, okay, we're sick and tired of hearing about it. It was something so small. Why are we still talking about it? And I like the fact that it's getting people to talk about it. I don't care how negative they want to be. There's been a lot of hate out there in regards to these hosts, and I'm not out to support that notion, but I am all about bringing about awareness and quite honestly, having the spotlight on nursing, just period, in any way, shape, or form, because you're going to pay attention a little more. And maybe that little bit of attention that you're paying, I can wrangle you into actually discussing a topic that concerns us, you know, whether it be low pay rates or horrible staffing ratios, or the fact that, you know, we love to joke and laugh that, you know, I was on my feet all day and I didn't get to pee, those kind of things. So while you're sitting here still paying attention to my profession because of what the View accidentally did, I'm going to start talking about stuff that is important, you know. So, and that's why I'm going to continue posting stethoscope stuff, is that because it's going to raise an eyebrow, and that's all I'm trying to do. And I'm going to spin it in some sort of positive fashion. So that was my soapbox. So.
I feel your passion. I really do. And I really, really hope someday at some point, I hope we're moving towards uniting together and having a voice and empowering ourselves, because we really haven't done that.
Well, I think this particular incident did a wonderful thing at kicking a certain stereotype in the mouth, and that was the sexy nurse stereotype was kicked in the mouth, because she could have very well done that, and nobody would have faulted her for it, because she was in a pageant.